Welcome back, beautiful beings of divine light, to the Luminary podcast. I am your host, and today I am your storyteller, Annie Perry, galactic psychic channel, interdimensional being of light, just like you. We are finally here at the next episode of the Galactic Wars. This has been highly anticipated. Thank you so much to the love and the warm reception to the first episode, the Lyran Legacy, to the psychic analysis where we went even deeper into everything behind that episode that I got to see and experience as the channel. And hopefully most of you have had a chance to listen to the parallel series that I'm doing with our new guest host, Alicia, and doing these fully channeled interviews. We got to talk to the Pleiadian Council of Light, and in this Galactic Wars series, we will come into contact again with the Pleiadians and go deeper into what was going on in the Pleiades while most of us were in the Orion system. As I have been channeling these episodes, what has come through for those of you who are wanting to take your spiritual awakening deeper and to get clarity around your awakening, your soul journey, and why you are here in this lifetime, and that has come through in the form of Activate, ILLUMINATE, which is my new 8-part course taking you from seed to source, from the beginning of your soul all the way through the journey of who you are. And we do that a couple of different ways, through activations, guided illuminations, and of course in class teaching, because I love to teach a good class. All of it together is designed to awaken your unique cosmic memory, to restore a lot of your memory to you. And so if you are ready for spiritual mastery, to step into spiritual mastery, even if you are newly awakened or a spiritual novice, that is totally okay. We're going to take you from novice to master by combining all 4 years of my work into a single distilled potent course that even the most newly awakened soul can take and receive a quantum leap in their consciousness and understanding of who they are and why you are here. You can register for that class at any time on my website, wellspringofficial.com, or in the description and show notes. My guides have been encouraging me to talk about it every single day, every single opportunity that I get, because it is one of the tandem transmissions that I have received through this incredible psychic upgrade that I went through in October, and working closely with the Arcturian Council located at Arcturian Galactic Command, and it's just been surreal. I cannot wait to get to the episode where it's all about the Arcturians and everything. I mean, they are just the most incredible species to learn about. We're also going to dive into all of the other star families. But today, we want to start at the beginning. We are going back before the Galactic Federation of Light was even formed, and certainly before it was known as the Galactic Federation of Light. Back when it was newly formed, it was the Confederation of Planets in service to the one infinite creator, and thankfully they had a little PR upgrade. But the time that I am taking you to today is before they were ever formed. And for most beings in this planet, that was a very, very long time ago. It almost seems like they had always been here because of how much they have been able to serve and assist all of us. And that assistance and that birth of the Galactic Federation really came out of the Orion Wars. So if you listen to episode 116, the psychic analysis, you know that where I left you was on a ship, on a Lyran ship that was running for their lives, literally running to hold their species alive, to hold the genetic coding that they had created. All of these codes needed to reach other planets so that they would be safe and secured, and so that the species that they had created, the Adamic templates, would live on. These are the same original templates that you and I were created with. So after the mass and complete planetary destruction of one of the Lyran planets, that was when the Lyrans realized they did not have the technology to fight the Draconian forces, and that they needed to flee if they had any chance of survival, and to securely transport the Adamic templates to other planets so that the species could continue, survive, and ultimately thrive throughout the universe. It really was the equivalent of a parent wanting their child to survive so that their lineage could live on, so that their creation, what they created over millions of years of evolution, could live on, could grow, could thrive, and evolve on their own. And the hugely cataclysmic moment was the full destruction of one of their planets. We haven't really talked about that in depth, but this is exactly what you see in the Star Wars movies, where they have this technology, which honestly I think is a little too big. It's a little bigger than what the Draconian forces would have been using, but it's a planet killer, and the Draconian forces found a way to completely destroy a planet. Now, something that we know about the Dracos is that they don't have good temper management. So when they received a lot of pushback from the Lyrans, and the Lyrans ultimately saying, "We are never going to bow down to you. That is not our energy. That is not our service. Our service is to others, not to self. And we are not going to make the quantum leap of changing and becoming one of your underlings and ultimately turning to the dark side." So when they received that level of pushback, they found a way to destroy an entire planet. This set off a huge wave of alarm bells through our galaxy, that there was now a species who had the technology and the will, which is so important, the will, as in they are willing to destroy an entire planet. There are not many things in the universe that are seen as an abomination, but destroying a creation of the Creator is seen as an abomination. It's not always stopped. However, it is up to the species residing in this galaxy to decide what they're going to do. There is no universal police force. And as much as many people kind of try to paint the Galactic Federation as a universal police force, they are not a universal police force, right? We learned that from the interview with the Pleiadians, where they said, ultimately, we have no desire to interfere in human affairs. And the only very few occasions where they have considered it strongly is when we were playing with nuclear energy and about to destroy our entire planet. That's really the only time that they have ever stepped in. They don't step into wars. They don't step into us fighting against each other or any of these other smaller skirmishes. It's really when it comes to, are you going to completely destroy your planet or the species or the animal and plant life that reside on the planet, because those are seen as just as sacred, and they have all their genetic coding and templates just like the species living on the planet. So if it comes to total destruction, there's absolutely going to be some sort of interference made. However, millions and millions of years ago, when the Lyrans were going through this, and they had only vague, distant knowledge of there being other species out there, there was no Galactic Federation. There was no one to come to their aid. In their part of the universe, they were seen as the most advanced, and so they considered themselves on the front lines, and the Draconian forces wanted their planets, and if they couldn't have them, they were going to destroy them. There's not a lot of emotional maturity in the path of service to self. So just keep that in mind as you are selecting your path of service ultimately, and for many of us during this lifetime. Where we left the Lyrans is fleeing for their survival. They were hunted for thousands, probably somewhere around 100,000 years. They were hunted by the Draconian forces who wanted to eliminate them. And they wanted to eliminate them not just out of spite, but before they were able to reach other species and start spreading this knowledge that the Draconian forces were ultimately coming for whoever was going to say no to them, whoever was not going to bow down to them, whoever did not have advanced enough technology to battle against them. Because before the Lyrans left their system, the Draconian forces had already been slinking around the galaxy, creating bases, observing other species, trying to get the tea on as many species, what kind of technology they had, what kind of species they were, what kind of resources their planets had. And they wanted it to ultimately be the same way that they approached the Lyrans. They'd been watching them, observing them, and then over time made contact with them. And it was very much wolf in sheep's clothing of, oh, like, we just want to trade with you. Like, look, there's 2 different species in the universe. Would you look at that? We should be friends. And you know what? We actually have more advanced technology than you, so we'd love to give this technology to you in exchange for a base on one of your planets, for some of our people to incarnate in your species' bodies. There were all kinds of little tricky maneuvers that they liked to use to infiltrate. And if there is a one word that you want to keep in mind as we go into the Orion Wars, it's the word infiltration. Because the Lyrans are incredibly intelligent species, and they learned very quickly all of the tricks that were up the Draconian sleeves. And they said, we'll use your own tricks against you in whatever ways that we can. Recently, one of my favorite authors, V.E. Schwab, and if you like these kinds of stories that are a little bit in the middle, a little bit morally gray, you might like V.E. Schwab. She's an excellent fiction author. But I read one of her posts recently where she talked about how she had been told by numerous different people that she was a fucking failure and was never going to be a successful author. One of her manuscripts, they told her, this absolutely sucks. And she said what brought her to success and ultimately having, 10 to 15 books now published. She said it was spite. That spite was a powerful motivator. And that she had used the fuel of spite. If nothing else came out of it, she was going to become a better writer, publish her books, and become successful, fueled by spite. Ultimately, to prove them wrong, that she could do what they were telling her she would never do. And spite is one of the fueling emotions for the young commanders, the young Lyran commanders who decided to take some of the ships and volunteers, whoever wanted to go, and head to Orion. Lyrans had received intelligence that the Draconian forces were rallying in Orion and planning ultimately a mass takeover of the entire system. That most of the species living in the Orion system were young third density beings, meaning that they had not gone through their first ascension. They had no idea there were other species out there. They had zero technology. They would have been the equivalent of humans in our ancient to medieval years. And the Draconian forces were strategizing about how they were going to infiltrate these planets and have a quick and easy takeover of these young baby civilizations, these young species that would never know a day outside of enslavement. They would never know a lifetime, not living under a king or an emperor. Their souls would be trapped in extensive karmic loops that would take hundreds of lifetimes to balance and to grow out of. And thankfully, the young commanders said, "Oh, hell no. You are not going to enslave those young souls." They took 7 smaller ships and redirected their path toward Orion, ultimately sacrificing their ascension to reincarnate in third density bodies and do all that they could to help and to save these species from tyranny. And today, I've brought one of those young commanders into the conversation. Please welcome Kathiya, Lyran Commander, channeled by me. I first want to say thank you so much, Kathiya, for volunteering your spirit, your energy to transmit this first part of the story. And I also want to say thank you for your service in the many, many, many millennia of sacrificing for us. We are the souls who came from Orion. We are the Orion refugees. We are the young soldiers who had no idea what we were doing. And it's no easy thing to essentially incarnate in a lower density of consciousness, knowing that you can get entangled into karmic paths and karmic patterns, and ultimately have to continue reincarnating until the karma is balanced once more, so that you can return to your density. So I just want to thank you so much for that. And now I will let Kathiya tell her story. Let it be known, we are no longer in fourth density of consciousness. We are grateful to have had an exciting journey and to have graduated into the fifth density. We are now what you might call nearly to the midway point of fifth density. And I am joined here by my brothers and sisters. Many of them were in Orion with us. We were young souls when the destruction of our planet and all of us fleeing Vega, it was our last stronghold. It was our center for spiritual light. There were many different beings here, for we had created multiple different bodies, types, styles, colors. We were somewhat diverse at the point of our planet's destruction. But often we were safe on Vega. Because of the amount of light that it held, it would ward off the Draconian forces. They could only fight us from afar. The more of us that centralized there, the more light and the less they were able to approach us. What you must understand, young ones, is that many of these battles in Lyra were not aggressive physical battles. They were battles of energy. Energy weapons were used against us. Weapons that could assimilate great darkness and destroy life force. However, many of our elders felt that if we stayed, we would be trapped. Yes, we were safe for a time on Vega, but we would not be able to leave. We would not be able to get our templates to other planets. We would not be able to thrive. We would always be watching the skies. We were young in those days and full of bravery. When we were fleeing, there were many of our ships that went to the Pleiades. We received much help from our guides, them giving us directions of where to go to find other species, other habitable planets that were suitable for our life forms and our density. This is important. As you are learning, there are different life forms, different types of bodies that are suited to each density. In the fourth density, we hold much more light. We are not as heavy or chemical as the bodies that you are experiencing or were born into on Earth. Earth was known. It was known to us. It was called the Garden of Gaia. But we were not invited there. It was, first of all, in second density, meaning that it was only hosting animal life forms at that time. It would not have been suitable for us. But we were guided to other places. We were told of the Syrians. We were aware, to a degree, of the Arcturians. However, their fast evolution would not have been suitable for all of us. But many of us traveled to the Pleiades, where there seemed to be a higher level of resonance, even though they were younger than our elders. And so there needed to be a little bit of splitting up. Our eldest elders would head to Antares, where they would later become sixth density beings, ultimately evolving into the seventh density, Lion of Unity consciousness, that channeled the transmissions in the first part of this story. And again, others head to the Syrians, others still to the Pleiades, and some even further away, just primarily for exploration. We received our intelligence, or word of what the Draconian forces were planning to do as they began to rally in the Orion system, from our elders. Our elders were in the fifth density of consciousness and had the ability to travel and to see through many of these plans that they perhaps thought were veiled from them. There were only very few Draconian commanders who were in the fifth density of consciousness. It is somewhat difficult to keep plans secret in the higher densities where we operate completely telepathically. When you are service to others, this is not a problem. But when you are service to self, this creates great dysfunction in the ranks, for everyone can see that you desire to dominate them, that you desire ill will towards them, that you desire them to bow down and serve those who are in the upper ranks. And due to not opening the heart chakra in the fourth density of service to self, there is, exactly as you would say, no love lost amongst the Draconian ranks. I remember this time well. I was one of the first to raise my hands and volunteer and say, I will go to Orion. Yes, there was some small part of us that desired to outsmart the Draconian forces that had destroyed our beloved planet. But there were other reasons of higher light to protect those who could not protect themselves. This became our mantra. This became the Song of Orion. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. For the Draconian forces had their eye on young planets that they were not supposed to interfere, and yet we could read and see their intentions clear as day. They had no intention of honoring the quarantine of third density, of staying away from these planets, and every intention of mass infiltration to create an easy takeover from within. Their plan was not without flaws. This may be difficult for some of you to hear, so I caution you now. Their plan from the higher-ranking officers was that they would kill off a certain amount of their younger forces, ultimately making them incarnate into these third-density planets. Once they were incarnated, they would approach them telepathically or in the astral realm. This is a realm that is not secret to any. It is known to all. If they could approach them in the astral realm, they would then begin to influence them as gods. They would present themselves as the final authority, as a god, as a king, as a master, emperor. Many of these words you know. These are not words to be used lightly, nor do we encourage any of you to embrace these words as if they are words born from love. They are words born from greed, from pain, and from unnecessary suffering, as the free will of younger species is taken right from under their nose, for they have no understanding of anything greater yet. The intention of the Logos and of the Elohim is ultimately the third density planets would remain under quarantine, so that there would be as little interference as possible as the younger souls decide their path and work out karmic entanglements. It is similar to being in preschool. And what dark entity would seek to take over a preschool? Kindergarteners, young ones. Now you may feel what we felt, that is an abomination, that we must do what we can to protect them, for they have no understanding and cannot protect themselves. If they could infiltrate, their plan was simple. They would establish themselves, or whatever incarnations they had managed to make contact with, as kings, as emperors, and continue their never-ending infighting, pinning species against species, kingdom against kingdom, centralizing as much power as possible to one individual. That individual would then be under the command of whatever fifth density being was controlling them from outside of the planet. The more beings that they exert their control over, and the more free will that they receive, often through deception, the higher their rank grows. This is their reasoning. It's important to understand their reasoning. And it is also important to understand that they do not see anything wrong with any of their actions. They do not see this as bad or negative, but rather the way the universe should be. That they are the more advanced species, that they could rule over all best, that everything would be better under their absolute and complete control. They do not know harmony as we do. We of the light and we of service to others do not operate in single units, which is why, of course, there must have been a group of us to go. We always operate in groups. We always travel in groups. There must be a unity and a balance to our decisions and to our energy. When you are service to others, there must be others around. There are no lone wolves. As much as this idea has been glorified in your world, we assure you this is the propaganda of service to self. That operating independently and without anyone and needing nothing and no one and doing everything yourself will somehow lead you down a righteous path. This is the path of imbalance, and we caution you all. What is a warrior with no tribe? What is a soldier with no army at his back? This is what you might call a sitting duck, one who is prime for the taking. Dark energy will always seek to separate, conquer, and destroy. Many of you observe these tactics that have been brought to your planet. We see it now clear as day, and many of you are waking to it. They seek to separate me, to pin me against the other. This is one of the oldest tactics of dark energy, and service to self. As we approached the Orion system, we made our assessments. We tried to be as covert as possible, not alerting any forces to our presence. There were 7 smaller ships with us, and no more than 1,000 individual souls. This is extremely small. But we had a plan, we had an idea. And again, please understand, we operate differently than service to self. We always operate in groups. We do not cross or violate free will. We do not seek to conquer or set ourselves up as kings and queens or above others. We rule only in councils. This is the way of balance. This is the way of expansion and light. So it was extremely tricky for us to enact this plan, but we took our ideas from the other side. We decided that we too would end our incarnations through our own free will. In 4th density, this is not done through the death process as you experience it. It is done simply through an inhale and an exhale. And we would volunteer ourselves to incarnate on these younger planets. We would do our best to shepherd them towards the light. We would do our best to show them the value and the power of their free will, and not to give it away easily. And of course, we would reconnect them to the power of the elements. This is where most of your power lies, and why many of you have been put in these plastic boxes called houses, separated completely from nature, never having your bare feet on the ground. It greatly diminishes your life force, your luminance, your remembrance of the truth and the power of who you are. So we would do all that we could to ensure that the species would kept deeply connected to the elements, plants, nature, the wisdom of their planet that is the mother that seeks to guide and to protect all of her children. However, we encountered a problem when assessing the different planets. The first was that the bodies were quite dense. Different species had come through the Orion system using the Adamic templates that had been given to them by the Elohim, and then by the Syrians, and then by the Pleiadians. There'd been much transformation. They were not nearly the same templates that we had originally created or were even keeping on our ships. There had been genetic manipulation, as you understand it, in order to create different types of species, that there would be a variety, but also that they would thrive in different ways. Much of creation is experimentation, and so other species are allowed to experiment with these creations as long as there is someone to somewhat watch over them and guide them. In your reality, you see many of your guides as angelic beings or as star families. It is a similar idea that a family would watch over their youngest creations and ensure their survival and their thriving, and while they are in 3rd density, ensure that there is little to no interference. Perhaps here and there may be other species coming along and asking for a certain resource from that planet. If it is harmonious and for the highest good of all, they may be allowed to approach and to enter that planet. However, it is advised that they stay away from the species that is growing and experimenting with life and life force. But our initial assessment of the bodies was that they were too thick, too dense, that it might take us many, many lifetimes in order for us to awaken and remember who we are and remember our purpose. We too would go through the veiling process that you experience on your planet even now. And so we were concerned that we would not be able to awaken ourselves and remember our mission and be of service, that we would get lost in all of the karmic loops in those types of bodies. For a description, the bodies were somewhat short, what you might call between 5 and 6 feet. Yes, for many of us, this is short. We were more accustomed to bodies anywhere between 6 to 10 feet. 6 being someone considered petite in our society. So these were between 5 to 6 feet, and they were somewhat bulky. There was no rhythm to their movements. There was a clunkiness to them. They had more of a square head and a square jaw, somewhat humanoid, although many of them had different imprintations on the skin, around the forehead, and the chin. This would definitely set them apart from what you call or consider human. They were a 5-fingered species, and they were learning how to till the ground, how to become farmers, essentially, creating small societies. And in the earliest days, they had lived in harmony. However, by the time that we had arrived, and as we were formulating this plan, we realized that the Draconian forces were already infiltrating, setting up and creating something called kingdoms. This is familiar to your ears. However, to ours, this was a great alarm bell. We did not operate in kingdoms with hierarchy, with one ruler to rule them all. We saw this influence and this distortion. And so we tried to move as quickly as we could, but we knew that we would need to use the templates to create a body more suitable to us, one that was more deeply connected to nature, that would allow us to gain our remembrance quickly, allow us to connect with those of us who would stay on the ships and operate as our guides. The bodies that we created were taller, of course, as we prefer. They were anywhere between 7 to 9 feet tall. We knew that this would give us a type of authority with these other beings so that they might listen to us more, but not so that we could rule over them, rather so that we would be noticeable. 7 to 9 feet tall. They were lithe, as you might understand a cat to be, how it moves more like liquid and less clunky like a dog. This was much closer to our true nature. It allowed us to move through forests or jungles, whatever topography there was, very easily, without drawing notice if we did not want to. It allowed us to blend in, but also, when you move like water, you are deeply connected to the physical body, and you have more of a drive or inclination to be deeply connected to the elements themselves. This is one of the reasons that this liquid movement is in nearly all of our templates. Should you see one in your world with this liquid movement, then you will know, you will see our DNA influence at play. So there was a liquid, a litheness to the body, a lightness. We prefer to be able to move, to jump, to climb very easily, not to be stuck in a clunky body where this is considered difficult. We want to be one with nature. We also design these bodies to have heightened senses. On our hands, there was a type of neural network that when we put our hands, or feet, but primarily our hands, on any living thing, we would immediately be able to connect deeply with the inner intelligence. The intelligence of any tree and any network of trees. We would be able to feel its essence and feel it communicating back with us. Although this would not have been verbal, it would have been an energetic understanding. We also changed the pupil of the eye, to be able to see greater distances and much more sharply, to be able to pick up the subtle shadows and colors that many of you do not observe in your world. They were not quite the full slit of the cat eye, but they were somewhat of a diamond shape, elongated from the round pupil that you see and experience in your world. The elongation allowed us to concentrate on the upper part of the pupil when we wanted to see distance, and on the lower part of the pupil when we wanted to see up close, almost microscopic, if you will. We heightened our sense of taste, our sense of smell, and our ears as well. our hearing, we could hear great distances. All of this was to be our utility belt, as we knew that as soon as we began our incarnations, the Draconian forces would seek to eliminate us completely, ending the incarnations and wiping out this new species. We were allowed to implant the species on one of the Orion planets that had sparse population, with the only instruction being from the Elohim that you must watch over this species. You must guide them wherever they grow, wherever they transfer to. They were well aware of what our true plan was, that we were intending to infiltrate as well and influence for the light. They took it in stride. Perhaps what you might consider a professor chuckling a little bit at a student's plan. But as they and you and I know, there must be balance, and so we are allowed to begin our plan of trying to tip the scales. Less than half of us remained in the ships and would continue on in long-living, what you think of as Lyran incarnations. And they would operate as our guides, connecting with us in the dream world, reminding us of our plan, guiding us towards the light again. However, they are not doing this with the force, with the dominion that the dark side does this with. It can only be done through honoring free will. And so whoever we woke up as in these new bodies on this new planet, we would have to remember who we are, what our connection to the earth was, what our strengths were, and what our goal was. And we would need to share this goal together. The planet that we infiltrated, you may think of as Orion One. As we've stated, on one part of the planet were these somewhat smaller, bulkier, humanoid-type beings who were learning at that time how to be farmers, and ultimately, as the dark side integrated into their ranks, becoming and forming kingdoms. Different peoples, what you might think of as countries, however, they did not consider it land mass yet. They considered it a group of people surviving together, more like a small city. The Draconian forces had no issue incarnating into these small, bulky bodies, and they were not pleased when the Elohim gave us the green light to begin seeding the planet with this new species that was going to live harmoniously and side by side. Our only instructions from the Elohim, aside from guiding this new species wherever they might grow, was that they could not be on the same landmass, that they would have to meet the other species organically. We could not just arrive in our ships next to some small village, planting these new bodies and walking out amongst everyone. We had to go where we would not be seen. We had to plant and seed the bodies. We had to allow them to grow organically, naturally, meaning there had to be procreation, there had to be families, there had to be children who would grow up, and we would have to enter into these bodies through the natural incarnation and veiling process. This entire setup took us approximately what you might call 993 of your years. The years on Orion One were more along the lines of about 600 days to 1 year, 600 of your days to one of their years, if you would like to make that kind of calculation. In many of these young planets, things move quite slowly. And so our plan for this new species that we would be incarnating into was that they would live pretty long, anywhere from 900 to 1200 of the Orion One years, which would be a little less than double of your own. Approximately 1 to 2 of you who will ever hear these words were there in the early days of Orion One. This journey through the Orion Wars lasts across 6 planets that were ultimately lost and fallen to the dark side. or to dominion under the Draconian Empire, which they now call the Orion Empire. It is blasphemy to my ears even now. However, all of those planets will someday be reconciled back to light. That gives us much hope and happiness for the future. In the early days of Orion One, the planet was quite cool. It was farther from its sun than you are to yours. It was quite cool. The colors there were strange, different, more blue in hue than what you experience as bright, vibrant greens, colors. You also have quite a varied landscape, whereas we did not. It was mostly field and forest across the entire planet. Thus, it needed to be a little further from its sun in order to maintain this across nearly the entire globe. There were some even cooler or cold points along mountainous terrains and either of its poles. There is where you would find the substance called by you snow. As we began incarnating and building up our own small civilization in these new bodies, others who were of a higher level of consciousness were welcome to join us. So it was not just the Lyrans who had broken away from the main command there. Others going through the incarnation process would also be offered, if they were of the consciousness and ability to handle these types of bodies, the invitation to incarnate as well. We would need more people, essentially, to create any kind of civilization. It could not simply be the 800 of us that had chosen and volunteered to go. Not only would we need to build up our own civilization, but we would need to make contact with the other civilization if we were to begin our plan of influencing them without war. This was an entirely different type of battle that we were fighting. This was what you might think of as espionage, infiltration, spying, and ultimately playing a very, very long game. A game that would last for thousands of years, simply on Orion One. It was maybe 3,000 to 4,000 of your years before our civilization in our newly genetically created bodies was established enough and advanced enough to build ships that would carry us across the bodies of water to meet this other civilization. We were long-lived, which made this highly beneficial. We were able to make contact with our guides within our first 100 to 200 years of incarnation, to remember the fullness of who we are, to stay connected to all of the elements in the flow of life force, to honor our commitment to service to others, and ultimately to begin designing what was needed for us to make contact, peaceful contact, and begin this influence of the other civilizations. After these 3,000 to 4,000 of your years, the other civilizations on Orion One had established 5 different kingdoms among themselves, each one of them identifying with the kingdom instead of with the planet or with the species. You know this well. Though you are all human, because of intense separation and the influence of separation, many of you think of yourselves as from different countries, different parts of the countries. However much we can separate ourselves, we do not encourage you thus. In Lyra, the only identification that was given was what planet you hailed from, but we considered all of ourselves as one. One living, breathing, beating heart of Lyra, the cradle of humanity. As these Orion One civilizations began separating themselves into their 5 kingdoms, taking different portions of land, building up cities in a circular form. This is wise, so that they can watch all sides of themselves. Their earliest wars were small skirmishes amongst themselves. They were not technologically advanced at all. They had weapons that you might think of as a hammer or club, the type of hammer that is used for the game you call croquet, similar in shape and size to that, although made out of thicker and more durable substances. As you can tell, it was somewhat primitive, and naturally we had no desire to be in any type of physical war with any beings, but they were being driven daily towards more separation, more anger, more violence by the dark entities influencing them, ultimately wanting there to be one to have dominion over all, one ruling kingdom that would rule over the others. And yes, they knew that we were coming, and so they did all that they could in that amount of time to establish these kingdoms. The influence behind these different kings, as they would set themselves up to be, was of course at least one Draconian commander. These commanders began to play a chess-like game, seeing which one of them could gain more influence, and they were delighted, wanting to spread this game across many different planets in the Orion system. This was very concerning to us because our force was still quite small. We only had enough to infiltrate one planet at a time. When we eventually made contact with these kingdoms, we were not welcome. They saw our different bodies and different human-like species as a threat to themselves. This was primarily because we were quite tall. And even though we had seen this possibility, we still thought that perhaps our demeanor, our kindness, our words, our connection to the earth would overcome any intimidation felt by our height. We underestimated how deeply the Draconian forces would pin these civilizations against each other, using primarily greed and jealousy as a driving force. I caution you, young ones, against greed and jealousy. These are forces that diminish, that contract, that lead you to rash service to self actions. It is better to observe the feeling rise up in you and to let it go. It took nearly another 1,000 years for us to establish a friendly connection with this other species, which we will simply call Orion One. This was a human-like species, though not like your own. In the galactic terms, they would simply be considered human, but this will be somewhat confusing for you. You are a different type of human. And so we established at first friendly trade routes, offering more than what they desired to give. We would give them fabrics that we had begun creating and weaving with natural resources. They had a great interest in our boats, but a terrible fear of water. None of them knew how to swim. There were not many lakes or rivers on this planet, although there was an abundance of seas separating the different continents. They considered the sea and the water a strange enemy that might swallow them whole, especially since they did not know how to swim. And we will admit to you that we were no strong, skilled swimmers either. Though we appreciate water, we do not desire to be encapsulated by it. So we built sturdy ships, and some of them, this human-like species, was interested to ride on these ships. We would take them around, give them a thrill. Only the bravest of them would step onto the ship. These were different than what you consider a ship in your world. They were made of wood, of trees, not of metal. We encourage this species to be as harmonious as possible, offering the earliest ideas of diplomacy, of friendliness, of agreements between two different kingdoms. However, they were often at war with each other and with themselves. When one king was no longer abiding the directions of the entities lording over them, or perhaps they got too close to us, we would find them mysteriously disappeared, dead from some unknown cause. Assassination is one of the many tools of the dark side. They use it frequently to get rid of what they call problems. If they can find a more suitable solution that is already alive, they will simply off one and replace it with the other. This is a tactic they have used on your planet, and many of you have used against yourselves. But this was the first place in Orion that had ever seen anything of this caliber. The Draconian forces quickly realized that five-fingered species were much more interested in war and separation. They were more autonomous, faster builders, desired more control. In many ways, you can understand the Orion Wars simply by looking down at your own hands. In fact, you can understand many of the wars that occur on your planet simply by looking at your hands. The five-fingered species is known to be a warring species. Although this was never our original intention, our intention was for them to survive, to give them the greatest odds of survival. So in a way, our own creation was being used against us. There were times on Orion One when their overlords wanted them to go to war against us. However, this human-like species knew that not only were we bigger, faster, not necessarily stronger, but we had more body mass. They were too intimidated to declare war, but that doesn't mean that they always made things easy. I remember well the first physical war that they involved us in. This decision was not made lightly to enter into a physical war. However, our guides, who were still on the ships, made the decision through weighing the timelines of what would be the best service to others. On Orion One, you may think of there as being these 5 kingdoms, and perhaps we will call this one Kingdom 1. Kingdom 1 wanted dominion over all, and had quickly turned its kingdom into a place of darkness, enslavement, depravity. They made a somewhat overestimation and turned all of their citizens into warriors, soldiers, putting in nearly all of them in their military. There was hardly anyone left to feed them, or to create for them, or to farm for them. They were often hungry, starving, performing not just as soldiers, but also as gatherers and cooks for themselves. Their king pitted them against the other kingdoms, and started the first of what you might call a world war. Although there were less inhabitants, the devastation was still immense. Nearly 1 million dead in this world war over one king's greed and desire to rule over the other 4 kingdoms. We watched and observed for as long as we could, before realizing that our service to others was not being enacted upon. We needed to choose a side and do the best that we could. Although we do not relish in participating in separation, we were already there in a separate species body. We had already crossed that line, if you will. We joined our forces with Kingdoms 3 and 4, who seemed the most inclined to the light, towards not turning their entire population into warriors. They wanted a degree of harmony, prosperity for their people. There was goodness, there was light. What we didn't know during our incarnation, but that our guides had become aware of, was that there were Antarian forces who had also decided to begin incarnating into this population, the shorter humanoids of this planet, in order to influence for the light as well. The Antarians are the keepers of a stargate that oversees the higher dimensions and the gateway into higher dimensions for those who are transversing or becoming transdimensional. This would happen in a deeper density of consciousness for most. Their natural form is an insectoid being. Many of you are familiar with the mantis beings. These are considered Antarians to us. These benevolent, higher dimensional beings gave up their long-lasting incarnations and began to incarnate into this population to see if they could be of service to others. And that is where the benevolent influence in Kingdoms 3 and 4 came from. We were delighted some years later when we found out that we were not alone. This is often the case in the universe, that when you are out doing this good work, you will also find others like you who desire the best, the highest, the greatest good for all. With their internal influence in Kingdoms 3 and 4, we were able to create a united front. For the first time in many thousands of years on this planet, reminding them that unity consciousness was possible, that uniting together was beneficial for all, that you could honor free will and autonomy while being united as one, that there did not need to be kings or kingdoms or mass separation. Overall, this was the most positive influence that we were able to have on Orion One. We experienced 3 different world wars on that planet as their species and civilizations grew. Still, at any given time, there was no more than 3 million residents of this planet. This is, as you can imagine, quite small. There were periods and times of peace, and we felt positively that we had influenced for the highest good of these inhabitants. However, Kingdom 1 continued to be ensorcelled in darkness, always feuding, the king always changing based on whoever would give up most of their free will and abide by their overlord's commands. Eventually, their army was too big, and they had infiltrated many of the other kingdoms, not through incarnation, but through physical traveling, physical relocation. As they spread their agents on the ground into the other kingdoms, they were able to bring about, ultimately, each kingdom's fall. We left Orion One after approximately 10,000 of your years. As our different incarnations came to a close, in between lifetimes we would assess with our guides, the Lyrans who were still incarnated on our ships, waiting for us. And while we never thought that this would be some sort of short affair, we knew that we were in this for the long haul. 1,000,000 of your years is not the same for us. 10,000 years was hardly anything at all. But we learned much. We were able to gather much information, much of the tactics, and in fact, there was chatter even in the ranks of the Draconian forces. The Lyrans have come. The Lyrans are going to give us a fight. The Lyrans have discovered how to infiltrate a species, even creating their own, asking for permission to plant the species on a planet. What will they think of next? We gathered as much data as possible from Orion One, which ultimately and quickly, because of the previous influence of the Draconian forces, fell quickly to becoming completely service to self. Nearly all of the inhabitants, having such a hard and difficult lifetime there, told their guides, "I do not desire to reincarnate there." And so the populations dwindled. As our species' lifetimes came to an end, We chose to limit procreation, rather to allow the species to naturally fade out of that planetary sphere, however, keeping our word that we would watch over the species and bring it ultimately to Orion 2, 3, and 4. As we spread our species, our plans expanded. We had many more souls who desired to join our quest. Some of these souls are you. Your own soul saying, I desire to be of service to the light in some way. I desire to go down there, incarnate, and see if I can remember who I am. And while many of us may have considered you young souls at that time, it would not have been your earliest incarnations. As we spread our species across Orion 2, 3, and 4, the Draconian forces were also spreading across all planets possible for their forces. They had a great many number more than us. Whereas we had come with less than 1,000, they had more than 2 million souls at their disposal. But the light is bright. Light shines brighter and more expansive than darkness ever could. But we were not prepared for the next weapon that they would ultimately introduce to Orion 2, 3, and 4. That weapon is called religion. The belief that any entity in this universe could be greater than you are. I will return again and explain more to you. Thank you, beloveds, for listening to our story. We are grateful, and we leave you now just having a moment of gratitude for Kathiya. Thank you so much for sending that story through me. I am so grateful. I want to share a couple of the visuals that I was able to see while channeling Kathiya. First of all, Kathiya says, if you would like to connect with her, please spell her name Kathiya, and that is pronounced Kathiya, and you can write that on a piece of paper, meditate, and she is happy to connect with you. As she has stated before, she is part of a group of Lyrans who are in the nearly mid-5th density, and so while they learned in 4th density all of the lessons of love, and ultimately that sacrifice is love without wisdom, they are now learning all of the ways of wisdom in that deeper density of consciousness. So when I think of the early Orion planets, I see very much like everything that Tolkien channeled, right? J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, it was totally like that. I still see it clear as day since the moment I became a channel. And I always wondered why I loved those movies and that whole world and universe. And what my guides would later say is, he was channeling pieces from the different Orion Wars, at least in the earliest part. And what's so interesting about Orion and how much of that we have brought with us, this planet, Earth, right now, Gaia, is full of Orion refugees. In fact, this entire planet is full of Orion, Mars, and Malduk refugees. And we will talk about all of those planets and how all of us came to be here. But just like Kathiya was saying, when a planet falls so deeply into the darkness, like souls don't want to incarnate there anymore. They're like, I don't want to be enslaved. I don't want to be born into slavery. Like, I'm not signing up for that. And so they'll start traveling. And so the population of those planets will greatly, greatly diminish. So early Orion, just like you can watch Lord of the Rings if you want to sort of activate all of those memories in you again. I've assigned a lot of clients to go watch those movies and they're like, I feel like I remember when I was there. And it really is just so clearly like that. And that memory is in a lot of us, which is probably why those movies resonate with a lot of us. Like we were all there. So in those early planets, I would say just channeling right now, Orion 1, 2, and 3 were very much like that. They had a similar topography, it would have been primarily field and forest, just like Kathiya said. Very heavy on the forests. I think Orion 2 and 3, they were quite dark. It was almost like it was overcast every single day. It was very cold there. We had thicker skin, so the bodies were human-like, but we had thicker skin. And as we progress into like 2, 3, 4, that's really when there started to be multiple different species on a single planet. And this was all experimental. This was all allowed by the Elohim, who are the architects of this universe. And it was all experimental to see like, well, what will happen if we put 2 different species, 3 different species, 4 different species? And so you can kind of see some of those species inspired by Orion. I would say it's not exact. The Lyrans who created those tall, life elf-like beings they didn't call themselves elves, right? They still called themselves Lyrans. Lyra is actually like the correct pronunciation. If we were to be a little bit more exact in our language, it would be Lyra. So they were still calling themselves Lyrans, and they were, referring to this kind of humanoid-like species that was bulkier. And it always reminds me, it's not exact. There was no like big beards or obsession with like being underground in those species, but it always reminds me of the dwarves in Tolkien's world, how they were like shorter and bulkier, and kind of more gruff. Those are really the species, or similar to the species that was living on Orion 1 and would have been considered a humanoid-like species. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that Kathiya didn't get to, and maybe she will get to in one of the future episodes, was horses. Horses are my favorite part of all my Orion lifetimes. Like, there were horses. We had horses. We had unicorns there. So they were real. They just don't exist on Earth. And the horses were kind of a hybrid creation between some of the Syrians who had made contact with some of the Orions, which you call yourself an Orion if you're a human species from Orion. It gets a little confusing because there's so many different types of humans. So the Syrians connected with the humans from Orion, and they ended up creating what we know as the horse, or if you're like me, you call it a horsey. And I just love the horses. It was like my favorite part, the horses that were there. And every time I channel for someone who had an Orion lifetime, like I always love to check out the horses. So that's really how it started in Orion. It started very much, primitive kingdoms, people who were like farmers or kind of getting out of hunter-gatherer status and moving into farming and moving into creating cities. And they would create circular walled cities. You see a lot of those in Tolkien's world. You see a lot of it in kind of our medieval folklore. And that's really where all of that is coming from. But it progresses. When we get to places like Orion 5 and 6 is when all of a sudden you're out of this like medieval world and you're into like Star Wars. All of a sudden you have flying ships, you have higher technology, you have light beams, you have war that's happening in the space, the aerial space above the planet. So I guess if I was to assign you any homework for this week, it would be go watch all of the Tolkien movies. I think the movies actually did a really great job capturing the essence, and they used a filter that really gave it like that darker, overcast look that we had in Orion. I would say it's a little more blue than what they used. But yeah, there was like a blue tint to everything, the whole atmosphere, everything that you saw. And it really makes me appreciate, like whenever I channel another planet, it makes me appreciate Earth so much. This is such a vibrant, beautiful planet, and like she said at the beginning, we knew of the Garden of Gaia. We knew of Earth, but we weren't allowed to go there. Like the only beings that were allowed to be here were some astral beings who were basically tending the Garden of Gaia while she was in second density. So before third density, which we just finished in 2012. something that I learned that I did not know is that the Antarians got involved in Orion. I had no idea until today, no idea until she started talking about them. So Antares is a stargate, like she was saying, and it's how you access the higher dimensions. And the dimensions are always a little confusing because you can have a third density incarnation that's like ninth dimensional. And that's what we were in Lemuria. We were higher dimensional, 9th through 12th dimensions, but we were in a third density planet. So there was a chemical component to our body, but an enormous amount of light also in our DNA fully activated. And unfortunately, after the fall of Lemuria, the fall of Atlantis, the DNA, the light in the DNA got diminished. And that's what we are doing in this lifetime, is literally reactivating the light so that Gaians can go through their natural and organic ascension process. But I love learning about the Antarians because they're so mysterious to me and kind of elusive. I've never channeled one. So we will see if any want to come through. I'll kind of send a ping out there to the universe, see if any want to come through. I know they're like giant mantis beings. They're the most different from humans. And that's probably why not a lot of humans channel Antarians, because it gets a little freaky. But yeah, I'm getting more used to how weird things are compared to what I thought they were, especially growing up in highly religious home where I thought there was only humans and demons and angels. I love that she ended on the weapon of religion, and that's something that I've been talking to and learning about, how the weapon of religion was introduced by the Draconian forces, and I'm sure she'll go into more depth, but essentially to enslave people with fear of, that you're going to go to a bad place when you die, so you need to do what I say. And so essentially lying to people to get them to give up their free will. And oh my God, is that a powerful weapon that has been used? I mean, it was used across the Orion system. They brought it here to Earth, and something very interesting happened when they brought it here to Earth, which we will get into more once the battle comes to Earth, and we will see how the forces of light were able to use the weapon of religion against the darkness and for the light and for the freedom and expansion of this planet. And right now, how it's being used right now for beings of light to be able to assist and help us. If there was any questions that came up in your mind, anything that you want answered on future episodes, be sure to leave it in the comments on the YouTube replay. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. Join me every day on Instagram. I'm on there all the time. I do Q&As. I put up a chat box all the time. Join me on YouTube for quantum healings, luminary classes, and don't forget to be on my email list. And that is where I am sending out invites to come to a private Zoom room and do Q&As or private classes for free. So make sure that you are on the Luminary letter email list. You can access that through any of the Wellspring official links. Beautiful beings of divine light, you already know that I will see you on the next one.